In today's show, we're going to take a look at the new version of Bootstrap, version 5.0, and what you need to know if you are upgrading or what the new features are that are important. So let's get started. Right, so Bootstrap is the world's most popular framework, and for good reason. And there is a new kid on the block. Version 5.0 does a lot of great things. The most important one is dropping the dependency for jQuery. This is where the industry has been going for a long time. I'm a big fan of jQuery. I think so are they. And they have just removed it because they probably no longer felt like it's something that was a requirement, and probably for good reason. It makes everything a little bit smaller, probably a little bit faster, although I haven't done any sort of tests. And that is kind of the big announcement, dropping support for Internet Explorer 10 and 11, which means that if you want to use those browsers or some other older browsers, you'll need to figure out what to do or use version 4 for those. I mentioned dropping jQuery dependency, and all the plugins have been rewritten to be in just regular JavaScript. Now, that does mean that you're going to need to do some things when you're upgrading. The number one thing is making sure that your iffy, the immediately invoked function expression, is up to date. So let me show you how to do that. So that's the first thing you need to watch out for. So if I take you to this code space right here, you'll notice that in my script.js, which is normally where I load my JavaScript, you're going to need to modify the iffy, which normally looks like this $sign function that you normally see at the beginning of most of the JavaScript files for Bootstrap will now just need to be a regular iffy. So it just needs to be rewritten in this fashion. So you'll see this at the beginning. And what this does is essentially wait for the entire framework to be loaded before you start implementing any of the JavaScript for your project. Super easy to do, but if you just go and update the framework today, that's the first thing that you're going to notice, that your JavaScript stuff is not going to work until you make that update. Also dropped a lot of different things, some things that were getting a little bit old. So if we take a look at the documentation, if you remember in Bootstrap 4, they used to have this component called the media component. So that is gone. If you're using that in your projects, you can no longer use this in the new version of Bootstrap. Honestly, you didn't really need it with the new Flexbox changes and all the utility classes. You don't really need to have any of these media classes in there anyways. So they got rid of it. Also, a lot of other things have been updated. One example is the column classes. So if you remember when you went to layout, one of the things about the main Bootstrap grid is that it has this structure right here. And essentially, if you are creating a layout, you're going to need to create in Bootstrap 4 a container and then a row div and then a series of columns. In the new version, you don't have to create the row. You can just go ahead and actually use the columns almost like standalone. So that's actually, I'm not sure how that's going to work. Nothing you need to worry about for migration, but definitely something to maybe check out if you don't need to have all that structure to use the column classes. That's actually quite nice because honestly, it's always like a lot of code just to put in a column. So they got rid of that. There's also a new type of class, and these are responsive gutter classes. One thing that I did not like about Bootstrap is that the gutters were sometimes they felt like they were too big. And I never liked the width of the gutters. I think they were 15 pixels. And sometimes you just wanted a smaller gutter. So now they have all these different gutter classes. They start like this, they're GX dash, and then you use one of these units. So that lets you create different amounts of horizontal gutters. Another thing that I really like is the display headers. So if you remember, and actually let me show you the old version of Bootstrap. This was sort of ridiculous. When you went to typography, you'll notice that you had these header classes that were fantastic. And then they gave you these really interesting display classes. These display classes were always way too big. I hated using them because I would always choose display 4. I wanted something that was a little bit bigger than the heading, but not like crazy size. I don't know, maybe people like display 1. I've never used it. The new classes for displays and the new version of Bootstrap are a lot better. So let's see if we can see layout. They also reorganized everything. So actually, there's a new section for forms in the documentation. But if you go to typography, you should see that the display classes, there's actually 2 new ones. So if we get to the display section, they're a little more, realistic. And also there are 2 new ones, display 5 and 6. You can see that display 6 kind of goes pretty well with the headlines, a little bit closer in size. So I think those are going to be a lot more useful. The forms use custom styles to make them more consistent in all browsers. And that is quite a few changes. There's a lot of changes in the forms. So if you go here to the form section, you can see that it looks really nice. And they have made all the form controls, everything is custom within Bootstrap so that when you go to different browsers, they're going to display more consistently between the different browsers, platforms, and devices. So quite nice. There's a lot of little changes in there. If you want to know also what all the changes are, a good place to go is this migration section at the very bottom. It shows you what you need to do or what all the specific changes are. I'm not sure what these NN and MN things mean. Maybe somebody can tell me. But there's also a lot of changes, though Bootstrap itself is written in Sass. At some point, it was going to be written in post CSS, but that hasn't been the case quite yet. It's still built in Sass. They have done a few improvements to that. But here's where you can find every single change. This is still alpha, and this is alpha 1. So I imagine we'll probably have about maybe 4 or 5 different alpha versions, and then they'll go to betas, and then they'll finally release the product. So sort of keep an eye on that. There are things that have been changed with the badge. So the modifier classes for the badges have been redone. You had a lot of classes that essentially just made different colors for the badges. So now the suggestion is that you use, the colors, like badge primary, badge secondary, those type of things. And also there is no more pill. There used to be a badge pill version. Now that's been renamed the rounded pill utility class. So that's definitely something to look for if you are modifying or if you are upgrading a site, that you're going to want to look through that specific change. So I think that's actually a component. So if we go to badges, instead of using badge secondary, badge primary, now you just use a regular background class here like you would for anything else. So that's another change to watch out for sure. There's also going to be no more card columns. So if you looked at the column section, I think that is a component. So actually the cards was divided into different layouts. So before, sort of like at the very bottom of this page, they gave you some very easy to build layouts. Yeah, so you have, for example, card groups, which just grab a series of cards and puts them side by side with these, lines that change color in the middle. And then you had another one. Let's keep on going. So you had grid cards, which let you use the standard grid in order to work with cards. Notice that yeah, they're not using containers, they're just using rows here for this one. And then they had this interesting way of creating a Masonry-like layout. So they are using their own sort of CSS technique to do that. I don't see, so actually they're saying that if you want to have the Masonry-like features, then you should really just use a Masonry plugin because it's not included, but they give you a little demo example of where you can get that. So that is gone. Also, they removed the Jumbotron component. The Jumbotron didn't make any sense. So if you remember in the old version of Bootstrap, we had a component named the Jumbotron. And the Jumbotron was sort of just a layout in a specific sort of way. So they're going away from giving you a specific layout, since you can do layouts with any of the utility classes, any of parts of the grid. Some of the text utility classes can actually generate this kind of layout a lot simpler. So there's no reason to have the Jumbotron anymore. Let's see. As I mentioned, the nav bars are now always going to require a container. Before that was optional. Actually, I didn't mention that, but the nav bars will all require a container. This just makes it easier for them to lay nav bars out, and it gets rid of a lot of CSS overrides that they had to do. So that is something to watch out for. I don't know that I never did any sort of navigation without a container. I always included it. So I don't know that that's going to be a big deal for me. But if you didn't have one, you probably want to make sure you have one in there. There are some new line height utilities. So let's take a look at typography. That should be maybe in typography. Let's see. So that should be, let's look for, actually a good thing to do is just look in here in the search. It has a dynamic search at the very top. So you can actually now specify different line heights. Sort of interesting. I mean, it's just becoming a very utility-based framework, sort of like what Tailwind is doing. They've adopted some of those things as well. Also, there is a background body class. And in the grid, this one's kind of interesting. Monitors are getting bigger, so they have added a new XXL breakpoint to all of the grid, which is great. I mean, I always feel like, my layout isn't, I want more breakpoints. So I think in the last version, they added the XL breakpoint, and now they have an XXL breakpoint. Maybe one day we'll have 20X XLs or something. So something else to look for. I mean, you have the ability to create another breakform maybe for larger devices. Another big change is in the grid. We have a new series of gutter classes. Essentially, it's the padding between the columns. So the way that you do those is with this GX and then a number. And that number allows you to change the spacing in between those. I've already mentioned this. So, and as I actually mentioned this, and I also mentioned my other note was display 5 and 6 were also added in there as well. So that is essentially the main changes to the framework. There's not a lot that you need to watch out for. I think that making sure that you have a container class, making sure that you are not using the media classes anymore, making sure that if you have like a Jumbotron, make sure you get rid of that. Badges have changed a little bit. Everything else is really about the upgrade to get rid of jQuery. That was the thing that took the longest. They've also talked about grid and what they're going to do with that. I think grid, if you looked at and followed the project in GitHub, you saw that grid is something that they've always thought about, including you can do an awful lot already in Bootstrap with using just the current grid system without needing CSS grid itself. They are looking at ways of integrating them. For the longest time, I think that what they have been waiting for is essentially trying to think about when including the CSS grid will be useful. If you want to use CSS grid, they don't prevent you from using it. You still have it fully available to you if you feel like that's an easier way to create something in Bootstrap, but it's not embedded yet. Again, this is Alpha 1, and they're trying to find ways of doing that. And I think that the best thing to do is always to look at the the documentation and make sure that you take a look and follow the blog. The blog is another good place to go. They always make the announcements and they give you a summary of what's been added. Another thing is the new look and feel of the website. There's also a new logo. And then they kind of give you the breakdown. You do have to go to the migration page. The migration page has more details. And that's kind of what I wanted to do today, just kind of give you, hey, here's the highlights. Here's what you need to watch out for. So let's see. Yeah, there's a few other pieces of information. And one of the things that's interesting is if you are using the SaaS version of Bootstrap, they are looking at some of the things that Tailwind CSS is doing, another pretty cool framework. And I'll be doing something with that soon. But one of the things that they do is give you a way to use the API to easily customize the layout and change the grid by using this thing called the Utilities API. It's going to be something that you do with the SaaS version of Bootstrap. So I'm sure eventually I'll do a course on that as well. And so here's where you have all the descriptions, but you also want to make sure that you take a look at migration, because migration literally has every single thing that has changed and how it's changed. So that is definitely a page that you want to go to. So the migration page is right here. I'll make sure that I add all those links at the bottom of the page. And one thing that I love about the blog, if you haven't seen the blog, is that Mark Otto always picks the coolest music for every release. I always get a kick out of. They appear to always be from the 70s. So I don't think he's that old. I just think he's kind of an old soul. But anyways, yeah, let's check out. So I have a comment here. Thanks for distilling all these changes. It's hard. Yes, it's hard. I know. Thankfully, I have a job where this is my job. My job is to go figure out what's changed. I think the thing that I'm trying with these broadcasts is to let you in on how I keep up with things. And essentially what I do is I go to, the documentation and I make a list of everything that's changed, and then I kind of try it out. So I'm doing some of the work for you. Eventually I will publish, a full Bootstrap 5 course, as well as a Bootstrap. Usually we do like a Bootstrap migration, and I'll probably add Bootstrap SaaS. I really enjoy doing the version 4 of Bootstrap SaaS. It's primarily how I use Bootstrap because it's really easy and cool to use it by modifying a few variables. It really changes the way that you work with Bootstrap. So definitely enjoy that. So let's see, in regards to CSS grid, maybe they'll use supports grid in the final CSS to make it worth both ways. Perhaps that's a good point. I think that we are going to really enjoy this new version. I'm very curious as to what they're going to do with grid, because for the long time, another thing that I do, because I have to keep track of it, is follow the GitHub repo. So if you haven't seen that, that's actually a good thing to see. If you want to know what is happening, it's a good place also to sort of comment. Actually, let's just go GitHub and then Bootstrap repo. I don't have the Bootstrap repo memorized. It's TWBS. That's because it used to be Twitter's. Bootstrap used to be part of Twitter, so they somehow retained the TW, Twitter Bootstrap sort of domain. So if you look in here, my window is kind of big. What you want to do is go to the projects section if you really, really want to know what is going on. And then you can take a look at the different projects. So here you'll see that here's what they're working on for Bootstrap Alpha 2. And, I occasionally, when I'm in between projects, I check this out and I take a look at what the group is doing. And you could see that here is also where if you find a problem, you can, report it right here. Also, it's a good way, or it's a good place to sort of comment on things. And also, you can take a look at when a feature is requested, then you can see any comments or give your opinion on the comments. It's actually a fantastic thing to do. Most people that contribute to open source contribute through the documentation. So that's actually a great place to, if you want to contribute work on. I've done it in the past. I've contributed like a couple of minor things to the documentation because it's easy enough. I mean, I feel like I'm not worthy to be touching the JavaScript, especially that migration from jQuery to regular JavaScript. Sort of scary, but that's a place where you can contribute. Also, you can sponsor the project, which is a great thing to do from right here. But if you want to know what is going to be, for example, in Alpha 2, you can take a look at this list, and that'll give you an idea of what they're working on. So yeah, I think that's all I have. I don't see any more comments. Of course, as I usually say in YouTube and LinkedIn Live, where I'm streaming, make sure that you like, you comment, subscribe, all the good things. And let me know what other things you want me to cover. I really wanted to get Bootstrap. I did another video on CSS.gg because I posted about it, and it was just this really cool thing that I loved. And I did a video on code spaces. I use code spaces today. You saw it. So I think that if I can kind of, I don't know, expose like some of the things that I'm exploring like I normally do, but I never get to share them with people, I think that could be a positive thing. And let's see, that's all I have. Oh, hold on. I don't think there's any. Oh, sorry. I thought there was a new comment there. That's all I have. So I will see you again later on in another episode of this thing that I'm calling Apply.